She bought an ancient stone tomb for 50 cents at a government auction in the remote mountains of Karakorum, where seasoned archaeologists and wealthy collectors stood silent, watching her bid on what should have been the discovery of a lifetime. But nobody else raised their hand. Dr. Lyralei Nakamura looked around the small crowd gathered outside the crumbling Zephyrian Archaeological Authority building, expecting anyone to challenge her bid on the newly excavated Titan burial chamber discovered deep in the Whispering Peaks. The auctioneer's gavel hung in the air, waiting. The tomb contained inscriptions older than recorded civilization and artifacts that would rewrite human history. Sure, the excavation permits were complicated, and the site was dangerously remote. But 50 cents for exclusive research rights to what appeared to be a mythological site of unimaginable significance. The silence stretched longer than it should have, filled with a tension that made the mountain air feel electric. The auction going once, the auctioneer called, his voice lacking its usual enthusiasm. Hadwin Greystone was a veteran of archaeological auctions, known throughout the region for his booming announcements of priceless discoveries. But today his weathered face was pale, and his hands trembled slightly as he held the documentation. Lyralei noticed something else strange about the gathered crowd. The people weren't looking at the tomb's photographs displayed on the makeshift easel, stunning images of carved stone corridors disappearing into mountain darkness, inscriptions that seemed to glow with their own inner light, and artifacts that defied logical explanation. Instead, they were looking at her, not with envy or frustration that she might steal their prize, but with something that made her confident academic demeanor waver. Pity, as if she'd just signed her own death warrant, instead of securing the research opportunity that would make her career. The crowd was small but distinguished. She recognized Dr. Mordecai Ashworth from the University of New Geneva, his silver beard meticulously groomed despite the remote location. Professor Celestine Voss from the Institute of Ancient Technologies stood near the back, her usually ambitious eyes now filled with something approaching fear. Even the notorious artifact dealer Corvin Blackthorne, known for bidding aggressively on anything potentially profitable, kept his hands firmly at his sides. Going twice, the auctioneer continued, and an elderly woman stepped closer to Lyralei. Dr. Serafina Night-Hollow had been her mentor years ago, before their professional relationship had ended over disagreements about the ethics of certain archaeological pursuits. Her weathered hands, marked by decades of careful excavation work in the most dangerous sites on Earth, twisted around her expedition scarf. She leaned in, her voice barely a whisper that somehow cut through the mountain wind. "You don't want that site, Lyralei. Trust me on this. Walk away." But before Lyralei could ask why a woman who had spent her entire career pursuing the most dangerous archaeological mysteries would warn her away from what appeared to be the greatest discovery in human history, the gavel came down with a sharp crack that seemed to echo off the surrounding peaks louder than it should have. Sold to Dr. Nakamura for 50 cents. The immediate aftermath. The crowd began to disperse immediately, faster than normal, as if they couldn't get away from the auction site quick enough. But as Lyralei approached Hadwin to complete her purchase, she caught fragments of hushed conversations drifting through the thin mountain air. "She has no idea what she's gotten herself into. Nobody's been inside that tomb since they first cracked it open 4 months ago. What happened to the Thessarian expedition? They were supposed to publish their findings weeks ago. The government's been trying to get rid of those excavation rights for months, Now we know why they were practically giving them away. The auctioneer handed her the excavation permits with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, avoiding eye contact entirely. The papers felt heavier than they should have, as if weighted with significance beyond their legal importance. When Lyralei asked about the site's archaeological history, and why previous expeditions had apparently abandoned their research, Hadwin simply shook his head and walked away without another word. That's when Lyralei noticed the most unsettling detail of all. Every single person who had attended the auction was now watching her from various distances, but none of them were moving toward their vehicles to leave the remote mountain location. They were waiting to see what she would do next, as if they expected something specific to happen, something that had happened before. The warnings multiplied. Dr. Serafina approached her one final time as she gathered her paperwork and prepared for the treacherous drive to the excavation site. Lyralei, that tomb isn't just ancient, it's been sealed for reasons that go far beyond archaeological preservation. Some discoveries are meant to stay buried, no matter how much they might advance human knowledge. What exactly are you trying to tell me, Serafina? You've never been one to shy away from dangerous research. Her former mentor's face was grim. This is different. The inscriptions inside that tomb, they're not just historical records. They're warnings. Warnings about things that were locked away before recorded history began. You've seen the inscriptions. I was part of the original survey team that discovered the site 18 months ago. We were only inside for 3 hours before. She paused, looking around nervously at the other auction attendees who were still watching them. Before we realized that some knowledge comes with a price that's too high to pay. Lyralei felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain altitude. What kind of price? Ask yourself why the Zephyrian government was so eager to auction off the most significant archaeological find in the nation's history for pocket change. Serafina called back as she walked toward her vehicle. And ask yourself why every archaeologist in 3 countries knew about this auction, but chose not to bid. As her mentor's vehicle disappeared down the winding mountain road, Lyralei noticed that several other cars were following at a discreet distance, as if coordinating their departure to keep the excavation site under observation. The journey to the Whispering Peaks. The drive to the excavation site deeper in the Karakorum range felt longer and more treacherous than the maps had suggested. Every kilometer took Lyralei further from the rational world of academic research and closer to something that felt increasingly ominous. The road, barely more than a mountain track, wound through landscapes that seemed untouched by modern civilization. The tomb had been discovered during a geological survey for rare mineral deposits, buried beneath layers of earth and centuries of landslides in a valley that local folklore claimed was cursed. The Zephyrian people who lived in the scattered mountain villages spoke of the area in whispers, calling it the Valley of Silent Stones, and claiming that travelers who spent too much time there began to hear voices that weren't there. Initial surveys suggested the structure dated back to a period before the Bronze Age collapse, that mysterious epoch when advanced civilizations across the ancient world had simply vanished from the archaeological record without explanation. Radiocarbon dating of organic materials found near the site suggested it was at least 5,000 years old, possibly much older. But it was the inscriptions that had captured the attention of scholars worldwide, even as they refused to bid on access to them. Written in a script that predated all known writing systems, they appeared to tell stories of beings called titans, not the mythological giants of later Greek poetry, but something far older and more sophisticated. Something that had once ruled the earth before humanity's rise to dominance. The excavation site. The excavation site sat in a valley so remote that Lyralei's GPS had lost signal 20 kilometers back. She navigated by landmarks and compass bearings, following directions that had been hastily scrawled on the back of her permit papers. Ancient glacial action had carved the valley into a natural amphitheater, surrounded by peaks that reached toward the sky like grasping fingers. The site itself was marked only by a deteriorating chain-link fence and a weathered sign in multiple languages warning trespassers that the area was under scientific protection. But the warnings felt perfunctory, as if posted more to satisfy legal requirements than out of any real concern for site security. The tomb entrance was a rectangular opening cut directly into the living rock of the valley wall. The stones that framed it were massive, each one precisely fitted and weighing several tons. Someone had built this structure using construction techniques that modern engineering would find challenging, and they had built it to last far longer than recorded human civilization. Solar panels and a small generator indicated that previous expeditions had established basic power to the site, though the equipment looked like it had been hastily abandoned rather than properly secured. First Descent Lyralei gathered her equipment, cameras, measurement tools, sample containers, and most importantly her tablets loaded with translation software and comparative linguistics databases. She also carried something that most archaeologists wouldn't think to bring: a Geiger counter. The preliminary reports had mentioned unusual electromagnetic readings from inside the tomb. The entrance tunnel sloped downward at a steep angle, the walls carved smooth by tools that had left no marks or scratches. Her powerful LED headlamp revealed stone that seemed to drink in the light, creating a strange optical effect where the carved surfaces appeared to glow faintly with their own phosphorescence. The air inside was surprisingly fresh, indicating some kind of natural ventilation system that ancient engineers had incorporated into the design. But there was something else in the air, a metallic taste that reminded her of the moments before a lightning strike. After 50 meters of descent, the tunnel opened into the main chamber. The Chamber of Wonders. Lyralei stopped breathing as her headlamp beam swept across the chamber that opened before her. The space was vast, far larger than seemed possible given the external appearance of the site. The ceiling disappeared into darkness above, supported by columns that had been carved from single pieces of stone with mathematical precision. But it was the walls that made her forget everything she thought she knew about ancient history. Every surface was covered with inscriptions, but not just carved symbols. The writing seemed to incorporate some kind of luminescent material that made the characters glow with soft blue-green light. As her eyes adjusted to the strange illumination, she realized the inscriptions weren't just decorative. They formed complex patterns that extended in 3 dimensions, creating a kind of textual architecture that hurt to look at directly. Mathematical formulas spiraled around the columns. Star charts that showed constellations she didn't recognize covered the ceiling, and woven throughout it all were repeated references to something called the Watchers and the Binding. But the chamber's most stunning feature sat in its exact center: the sarcophagus. The stone sarcophagus was carved from a single piece of what appeared to be black marble, though Lyralei's Geiger counter was clicking steadily, suggesting the stone contained elements that weren't found in normal geological formations. The lid had been moved aside, not recently but not in ancient times either. The stone showed tool marks from modern equipment,
Someone had opened this sarcophagus within the last few decades.
Inside, instead of human remains, lay objects that shouldn't exist according to everything Lyralei knew about technological development. Crystalline devices that pulsed with their own internal light, connected by what looked like fiber optic cables made from some kind of organic crystal. Metal alloys that showed no signs of corrosion despite their apparent age. And scattered among them, tablets covered in mathematical equations that described principles of physics that human science was only beginning to understand. The objects weren't just ancient, they were functional. As Lyralei leaned closer, the crystal devices responded to her presence, their internal light brightening and their pulsing synchronizing into complex patterns. The living inscriptions, as Lyralei began photographing the artifacts, she noticed that the inscriptions on the chamber walls were changing. Not physically moving, but the luminescent elements were shifting, highlighting different portions of text in response to her presence and her investigation of the sarcophagus contents. The patterns seemed to be trying to guide her attention to specific sections of the carved text, as if the chamber itself was attempting to communicate with her. Using her linguistic databases and translation software, she began to make sense of the script. The language was incredibly sophisticated, incorporating mathematical concepts, astronomical data, and what appeared to be scientific formulas into its basic grammatical structure. It was as if the entire language had been designed by beings who thought in terms of multiple dimensions and cosmic-scale engineering projects. One section, highlighted more brightly than the rest, seemed to tell a story. A civilization of beings with knowledge that exceeded anything in human history had once ruled not just the Earth, but multiple worlds across the galaxy. They had been master engineers, capable of manipulating matter at the subatomic level and bending space-time itself to their purposes. But they had been defeated, not by armies or weapons, but by something called the Binding, a cosmic event that had stripped them of their physical forms and locked them away in a dimension parallel to our own. The warning protocol, as Lyralei continued translating, a disturbing pattern emerged. The inscriptions weren't just historical records, they were warnings. Detailed instructions about maintaining barriers between dimensions, technical manuals for containing entities that existed in states of matter that human science couldn't classify. And most disturbing of all, countdown timers measuring cosmic cycles that determined when these barriers would weaken. According to the calculations carved into the chamber walls, humanity was approaching the end of one of these cosmic cycles. The barriers that had contained the Titans for millennia were weakening, and soon they would be able to influence the physical world again. The inscriptions made clear that this wasn't just an abstract threat. The Titans had been monitoring human development through the barriers, waiting for the species to develop technology sophisticated enough to serve their purposes. And that time was now. The artifacts in the sarcophagus weren't just archaeological specimens, they were tools. Devices designed to help the Titans re-establish their physical presence in our dimension when the barriers finally failed. The first contact Lyralei was so absorbed in translating the warning protocols that she didn't notice the change in the chamber's atmosphere until her breath began misting in the suddenly frigid air. The crystal devices in the sarcophagus were pulsing brighter now, and the inscriptions on the walls had begun to pulse in synchronization with them. That's when she heard it. A sound like voices, but speaking in harmonics that human vocal cords couldn't produce. The sound seemed to come from the stones themselves, as if the entire chamber had become some kind of communication device. Her electronic equipment began malfunctioning. Her cameras showed distorted images that seemed to capture things that weren't visible to her eyes. Her tablets displayed data that wasn't in their memory banks, mathematical formulas that described the manipulation of dimensional barriers, engineering specifications for devices that could reshape reality itself. The Geiger counter was clicking rapidly now, suggesting that the chamber's unusual radiation was intensifying in response to her presence and her investigation of the artifacts. The realization as the strange phenomena intensified around her, Lyralei began to understand the true horror of her situation. The tomb hadn't been built to house the remains of ancient beings, it had been built as a communication relay. The artifacts weren't just tools for the Titans to use when they returned, they were devices for maintaining contact with them while they were imprisoned. And by activating the chamber through her presence and investigation, she had just opened a channel of communication that had been sealed for thousands of years. The voices in the stone were getting clearer, more insistent. They spoke of power beyond imagination, of knowledge that would make her the most influential scientist in human history, of technologies that could solve every problem facing human civilization. But they also spoke of prices, of loyalty, of service to entities whose goals weren't necessarily compatible with human survival. The Watchers arrive as Lyralei backed toward the chamber entrance, her malfunctioning equipment sparking, and her head spinning from the increasingly intense radiation. She heard something that made her blood freeze. Footsteps in the entrance tunnel, multiple people moving with coordinated precision. She wasn't alone in the tomb anymore. The voices in the stone grew more urgent, more demanding. The crystal devices in the sarcophagus were now pulsing so brightly that they cast strange shadows that seemed to move independently of any light source. And from the darkness of the entrance tunnel came voices, human voices, but speaking in languages she didn't recognize, using words that seemed designed to counteract whatever force was building in the chamber. The Ancient Order three figures emerged from the tunnel, moving with the confidence of people who had been in this chamber before. They wore modern expedition gear, but each carried artifacts that looked as ancient as anything in the tomb itself, crystalline devices that pulsed in counter-rhythm to the ones in the sarcophagus, metal amulets that seemed to absorb the strange light coming from the walls. The leader was a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair and eyes that had seen things that most people couldn't imagine. She spoke to Lyralei in accented English, while her companions began setting up equipment designed to contain whatever forces were building in the chamber. Dr. Nakamura, I am Valdres Thornfield, and these are my associates Kestrel Ravencroft and Darius Nightbane. We represent an organization that has been monitoring sites like this for over 3,000 years. You have activated something that was meant to remain dormant. What organization? What's happening here? We are the Watchers, Valdres replied, using the same term that appeared repeatedly in the chamber's inscriptions. We are the descendants of those who were present at the binding, who helped lock away the Titans when they last threatened to destroy human civilization. As she spoke, her companion's equipment began to counteract the phenomena in the chamber. The voices in the stone grew fainter, the crystal devices dimmed, and the inscriptions on the walls returned to their original steady glow. The truth revealed, the beings you called Titans, Valdres explained as they worked to contain the chamber's energies, are not mythological creatures. They are entities from a parallel dimension who ruled this reality before the rise of human civilization. They were master manipulators of matter and energy, capable of reshaping entire worlds according to their desires. But they were defeated, not defeated, contained. The binding was a cosmic event that our predecessors triggered at enormous cost, sealing the Titans away in a dimension where they could observe our reality, but not directly influence it. Darius looked up from his equipment. The seals are weakening, Dr. Nakamura. The cosmic cycle is approaching its end, and soon the Titans will be able to breach the barriers again. Sites like this one are their anchor points, places where the dimensional walls are thinnest. Why didn't anyone tell me this at the auction? Why let me activate whatever this is? Valdris's expression was grim. Because the Titans have been preparing for their return for millennia, they have influenced human development, guided us toward creating technologies they can use when they break through. And they have human agents, people who serve them in exchange for power and knowledge. The auction was a trap, Kestrel added. The Titans' human servants wanted someone to activate this chamber, to re-establish communication with their masters. They expected one of their agents to win the bidding, but I won instead. Yes, which means you have a choice to make, Dr. Nakamura. You can join us in containing the threat that you've accidentally awakened, or you can become another tool in the Titans' plan to reclaim this reality. The scope of the conspiracy as Valdris and her team worked to secure the chamber, they explained the true scope of what Lyralei had stumbled into. The tomb in the Whispering Peaks was one of dozens of similar sites around the world, ancient communication relays that the Titans had built before their imprisonment, designed to be activated when human technology became sophisticated enough to serve their purposes. The Titans have been patient, Valdris explained. They've guided human development for thousands of years, ensuring that we would eventually create technologies they could use, quantum computers, particle accelerators, space-based communication networks, all of it designed to help them break through the dimensional barriers. How many people know about this? More than you might think, fewer than there should be. The Titans have been recruiting human agents for centuries, offering them glimpses of advanced technology in exchange for their loyalty. Many of the greatest scientific breakthroughs in human history came from Titan-influenced research. Darius looked up from sealing the sarcophagus. The auction wasn't random, Dr. Nakamura. You were selected specifically. The Titans have been monitoring human archaeologists and scientists, identifying those with the skills and knowledge to activate sites like this one. The personal cost, as the implications of her situation became clear, Lyralei felt the weight of knowledge that she wished she could forget. She had spent her career seeking to understand humanity's ancient past, never imagining that she would discover threats to humanity's future. What happens now? She asked. Now you understand why the other archaeologists at the auction looked at you with pity. Valdris replied. Knowledge of the Titans comes with a price. You can never return to your normal life, Dr. Nakamura. Too many people, human and otherwise, will be watching you now. The Titans' agents will try to recruit you, Kestrel added. They'll offer you access to technologies that could revolutionize archaeology, knowledge that could make you the most famous scientist in the world. But acceptance means becoming part of a conspiracy to end human independence. And if I refuse, then you become a target, Darius said bluntly. The Titans can't allow someone with your knowledge and skills to work against them freely. The choice as they prepared to leave the tomb,
sealing it with technologies that Lyralei was beginning to realize were far more advanced than anything in mainstream science. Valdres offered her a choice that would determine the rest of her life.
You can come with us, Dr. Nakamura. Join the Watchers and help us contain the threats that sites like this represent. Use your archaeological skills to find and secure Titan artifacts before they can be activated. What would that involve? Traveling to the most dangerous places on Earth, confronting human agents who will kill to protect Titan secrets, and living with the knowledge that if we fail, the beings who once ruled this world will rule it again, and humanity will become nothing more than their tools. Lyralei looked back at the sealed chamber, thinking of the artifacts inside that represented technologies beyond human understanding, and the inscriptions that had tried to warn humanity of threats it wasn't equipped to comprehend. What about my research? My career? Your real research is just beginning, Valdres replied. But it won't be the kind that wins academic awards. It will be the kind that might help save human civilization. The decision as they emerged from the tomb into the mountain starlight, Lyralei made the decision that would define the rest of her life. The 50-cent purchase had cost her everything she had thought she wanted. A normal academic career, the respect of her peers, the simple joy of uncovering humanity's past. But it had also revealed something far more important. Humanity's future was in danger, and she now had the knowledge and opportunity to help protect it. I'm in, she told Valdres as they sealed the tomb entrance with technology that would keep it secure for decades. But I want to understand everything, the full scope of the threat, the extent of the conspiracy, and what we're really fighting against. That will take time, Dr. Nakamura, and it will take you to places that will test everything you think you know about reality itself. As they walked back toward their vehicles, Lyralei noticed that her phone now showed dozens of missed calls and messages from numbers she didn't recognize. The Titan's human agents had already begun trying to contact her. The 50-cent tomb had just become the most expensive purchase of her life, and quite possibly the most important decision in human history. Previously, Dr. Lyralei Nakamura discovered ancient Titan technology in a tomb she bought for 50 cents, awakening forces that the Watchers had contained for millennia. The countdown begins 3 months after joining the Watchers. Lyralei stood in their secret command center beneath Geneva, watching cosmic radiation readings spike across monitors worldwide. The dimensional barriers were collapsing faster than their ancient calculations had predicted. How long do we have? She asked Valdres, who was coordinating containment efforts across 6 continents. The binding will fail completely in 72 hours, Valdres replied grimly. When it does, every Titan site on Earth will activate simultaneously. Their consciousness will flood back into our reality. Darius looked up from his quantum interference array. The human agents have been more active too. They're positioning themselves at key infrastructure points, power grids, communication networks, military installations. Once the Titans return, their servants will hand over control of human civilization. Lyralei felt the weight of responsibility crushing down on her. Her 50-cent purchase had inadvertently started a countdown to the end of human independence. The impossible plan. There is one option, Kestrel announced, emerging from the archive chambers with an ancient crystalline tablet. According to texts from the original binding, it's possible to reverse the process, but it requires someone to enter the Titan dimension during the moment of barrier collapse. That's suicide, Valdres said flatly. No human consciousness can survive in their reality. Not survive, Kestrel corrected. but they could trigger a new binding from the inside, sealing the dimensional breach permanently. The Titans would be trapped forever, unable to influence our world again. Lyralei studied the tablet's glowing inscriptions. The mathematics were staggering. Equations describing the manipulation of space-time itself, formulas for rewriting the fundamental constants that governed reality. "I'll do it," she said quietly. "Lyralei, no," Valdris protested. "You don't understand what you're volunteering for. The Titan dimension operates according to laws of physics that will tear apart human consciousness. You won't just die. You'll cease to exist in any meaningful sense, but humanity will be free." The global crisis. As they debated, reports flooded in from around the world. The Statue of Liberty was glowing with the same blue-green light as the tomb inscriptions. Stonehenge had begun resonating at frequencies that were causing seismic disturbances across England. The pyramids of Giza were generating electromagnetic pulses that were disrupting satellite communications. Every ancient site that legends claimed was built by gods was revealed to be a Titan anchor point, and all of them were awakening simultaneously. "The human governments are starting to panic," Darius reported. "They're detecting the energy readings, but they don't understand what's causing them. Some are mobilizing military forces, which won't do any good against entities that exist partially outside our dimension," Valdris said bitterly. "We're watching the end of the world, and the people we're trying to protect don't even know it's happening." The race against time, with 57 hours remaining until total barrier collapse. Lyralei and the Watchers launched their desperate plan. They would return to the tomb in the Whispering Peaks, the site where the countdown had begun, and use its quantum resonance array to project her consciousness into the Titan dimension at the moment of barrier failure. The journey back to the Karakorum felt like traveling backward through time. Every mile brought them closer to the epicenter of forces that had been building for millennia, and every hour brought the cosmic deadline closer. When they reached the tomb, they found they weren't alone. Dr. Seraphina Night Hollow was waiting for them, along with a dozen other figures Lyralei didn't recognize: elderly academics, middle-aged engineers, young scientists, all of them carrying the same look of grim determination. "The other Watchers," Valdris explained. "Everyone who has dedicated their lives to containing this threat. The revelation, there's something we haven't told you, Lyralei," Dr. Night Hollow said as they descended into the tomb. "The original binding wasn't performed by humans alone. It required cooperation between early human civilization and a faction of Titans who opposed their species' domination of other realities. The tomb chamber had changed. The crystal devices were now active, projecting holographic displays that showed dimensional barriers fracturing across the globe. But among the displays was something new: images of beings that looked almost human, but with an otherworldly quality that marked them as something more. "The Titan rebels," Seraphina continued. "They've been trapped in the dimensional prison with their enemies for thousands of years, waiting for another chance to seal the barriers permanently. But they need a human consciousness to serve as an anchor point in our reality." "You mean I won't be alone in there?" "No, but you'll be trusting beings whose motivations we can never fully understand, in a realm where the basic laws of existence don't apply to human minds." The final choice, with 36 hours remaining. The dimensional barriers were fluctuating wildly. Reality itself was becoming unstable. In major cities around the world, people reported seeing things that shouldn't exist: shadows that moved independently of light sources, geometric patterns that caused vertigo when looked at directly, voices speaking in mathematical formulas. "The Titans are starting to break through," Kestrel announced. Their consciousness is leaking into our reality ahead of the full barrier cut. Lyralei made her decision. Start the projection sequence. As the Watchers activated technologies that combined ancient Titan engineering with modern quantum physics, she felt her consciousness beginning to separate from her physical body. The last thing she saw in the human world was Valdres's face, filled with respect and sorrow. Into the unknown, the Titan dimension was nothing like human reality. Space had 12 dimensions instead of 3. Time flowed in spirals instead of lines. Consciousness existed as geometric patterns that could reshape themselves at will. But she wasn't alone. The rebel Titans were waiting for her, beings of pure thought and mathematical precision, who had spent millennia preparing for this moment. Together they began the work of rewriting the fundamental equations that governed the barriers between dimensions. It was like performing surgery on the universe itself, requiring precision beyond anything human minds were designed for. The new binding, as Lyralei worked with the rebel Titans to seal the dimensional breach, she began to understand the true scope of what was happening. The Titans who sought to reclaim Earth weren't just conquerors, they were refugees from a reality that was dying, seeking to escape into a universe with more stable physical laws. But their salvation would mean the end of human development. They would reshape Earth's reality to match their needs, and humanity would become nothing more than biological components in their cosmic engineering projects. We offer a different path, the rebel Titans communicated to her in patterns of pure meaning. Cooperation instead of domination, shared knowledge instead of subjugation. Together they crafted a new binding, not a prison but a treaty. The barriers between dimensions would remain closed, but communication would be possible. Humanity could develop at its own pace, with access to Titan knowledge when it was ready to use it responsibly. Resolution and transformation. When Lyralei's consciousness returned to her body in the tomb chamber, the cosmic radiation monitors showed that the dimensional barriers had stabilized. Around the world, the ancient sites had gone dormant again. The Titan invasion had been prevented, but something had changed. The crystal devices in the tomb now displayed star charts showing pathways between dimensions, mathematical formulas that described technologies beyond current human understanding, and most importantly, communication protocols for contacting the rebel Titans when humanity was ready for the next phase of development. What happens now? She asked Valdres as they emerged from the tomb into the mountain dawn. Now we begin the real work, Valdres replied, preparing humanity for eventual contact with beings who exist beyond our current understanding of reality. It will take generations, but thanks to you we have time. Lyralei looked back at the tomb that had started her incredible journey. Her 50-cent purchase had cost her a normal life, and nearly cost her existence itself, but it had also given humanity its freedom and its future. She was no longer just an archaeologist who had stumbled onto an ancient mystery. She was the first human ambassador to beings who existed in dimensions beyond imagination, and the guardian of knowledge that would shape humanity's destiny among the stars. The 50-cent tomb had been the best investment in human history.